In the moment the knife went in, he finally understood. The man smiling at him across the table was not his friend. He never had been. 3 years later, Han Ji-won would die alone on a cold rooftop, broken and forgotten, with that smile still burned into his memory. This is the story of how he came back from the dead, and how he made every one of them pay. But to understand the revenge, you first have to understand the empire. And to understand the empire, you have to go back to a boy who had absolutely nothing. Han Ji-won was born in a cramped room above a fish market. His father gutted fish for 14 hours a day. His mother took in laundry. They had no money, no name, and no connections. What the boy had instead was a mind that never stopped and a hunger that never quieted. While the other children slept, he read. Business, markets, code, anything he could borrow or steal from a library. He swore to himself again and again that he would not die in the same room he was born in. At 23, with a single idea and a borrowed laptop, he started knocking on doors. Investors, banks, anyone with money. And one by one, for 2 long years, every single one of them laughed him out of the room. They told him he was nobody. They told him his idea was a toy. They told him to go back to the fish market where he belonged. He smiled, thanked them, and walked straight to the next door. He slept 4 hours a night on the floor of a rented room. He taught himself to code by morning and to sell by night. He failed and failed and failed again until failure stopped frightening him at all. And then, in a cheap cafe on a rainy afternoon, he met the one man who did not laugh. His name was Park Dae-soo, sharp, charming, magnetic. He listened to Ji-won's pitch all the way to the end, and then he leaned forward and said the words that would change everything. "I believe in you," Dae-soo said. "The world is full of cowards who can't see what's right in front of them. Let's build something they'll never forget." And he shook Ji-won's hand. It was the happiest moment of Ji-won's young life. It was also the beginning of his destruction. For 10 years, they were inseparable. Ji-won was the visionary, the engine, the one who worked until dawn. Dae-soo was the face, the talker, the one who charmed the rooms Ji-won couldn't. They called themselves brothers. Ji-won meant it. The company grew slowly and then all at once. A clever idea became a product. A product became a brand. A brand became a name that every household in the country suddenly knew. They were no longer 2 desperate young men. They were the future. The magazines loved them, the 2 boys from nothing who built an empire. They put Ji-won and Dae-soo side by side on the cover, smiling. Ji-won kept a framed copy on his wall. He thought it was proof of friendship. Dae-soo saw it as proof of how much there was to take. 10 years after that handshake in the cafe, they cut the ribbon on a 40-story headquarters of glass and steel. Han Ji-won, the boy from the fish market, stood at the top of it as chief executive of a company worth billions. Everywhere he walked, people bowed. The investors who had laughed now begged for 10 minutes of his time. He had clawed his way from a room above a fish market to the top of the world, and he had done it without ever once betraying anyone. He assumed everyone around him lived by the same code. That assumption would cost him everything. At the height of his success, he married. She was beautiful, poised, the daughter of an old wealthy family. She had not looked at him twice when he was poor. Now she smiled for the cameras on his arm. He told himself it was love. He wanted so badly for it to be love. He had everything a man could want: a company that printed money, a glittering marriage, a board of directors who nodded at his every word, and a best friend he would have trusted with his own life. He had never been happier. He had never been more blind. Because while Ji-won spent his nights dreaming of the next product, Park Dae-soo spent his counting shares. He had not spent 10 years building a friendship. He had spent 10 years building a position. And now, quietly, he had decided that being the face was no longer enough. He wanted the whole thing. It started small. A board member taken to dinner, a favor here, a promise there. Dae-soo offered them what Ji-won never would: more shares, more control, more money, skimmed quietly off the top. One by one, the men Ji-won trusted began to belong to someone else. He hired the best corporate lawyers in the country and paid them in secret. He commissioned audits designed to find nothing and imply everything. He built a case against his own partner, brick by patient brick, over 2 full years. And Ji-won, drunk on success, never felt the floor being removed beneath him. There were signs, a meeting he wasn't invited to, a document that went missing, a board member who suddenly couldn't meet his eyes. But Ji-won explained each one away. Why would his brother betray him? They had built this together. The thought was simply impossible, so he never let himself think it. On the last good night of his old life, Ji-won took his wife to dinner to celebrate the best quarter the company had ever posted. He raised a glass to the future. She smiled and touched her glass to his. She already knew what would happen in the morning. She had known for weeks. She said nothing at all. It came on an ordinary Tuesday with a single phone call. An emergency board meeting, his assistant said, her voice strangely tight. Effective immediately. He told her to calm down, that it was probably nothing. He fixed his tie in the mirror. He had no idea he was looking at the last face of the man he used to be. He walked the long glass hallway toward the boardroom the way he had 1,000 times before, already planning solutions to a problem he assumed was financial. He had walked into 1,000 crises and walked out the winner. He did not yet understand that this time he was not walking in to solve the crisis. This time he was the crisis. He opened the doors, and the room went silent. Every chair was already full. Every board member was seated, waiting, turned toward him. No one offered him the head of a table. No one offered him anything at all. He felt it before he understood it, the temperature of the room, the way every familiar face had turned to stone, the way no one would meet his eyes. This was not a meeting, this was a sentencing, and he was the only person in the room who hadn't been told. And there, in the chair that had always been his, sat Park Dae-soo, his partner, his brother, the man whose hand he had shaken in a rainy cafe a lifetime ago. Dae-soo looked up at him, calm and unhurried, and he smiled. That smile would haunt Jae-won for the rest of his life, and the one after it? They called it a vote of no confidence. Dae-soo slid a thick stack of papers across the polished table. Fabricated mismanagement, invented misconduct, numbers twisted into a noose. The board has already reviewed everything, he said gently. The vote is done. It's better for everyone if you don't make this difficult. Ji-won's composure shattered. He slammed his hands on the table and demanded that they look at him, the man who had built every brick of this company with his own hands. He demanded loyalty. He demanded the truth. But loyalty, he learned in that instant, is only a word people use until a better offer arrives. As the security guard stepped through the door, Dae-soo rose and walked to him close so only Jae-won could hear. "You were never the genius," he whispered. "You were the labor. I was always the one with the vision. Thank you, brother. Thank you for building my company for me." By noon, he was no longer the chief executive. By evening, 2 guards he used to greet by name walked him out through the lobby of his own building, carrying everything he had left in a single cardboard box, while the people who once bowed to him now whispered behind their hands and stared. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 2 hours, unable to turn the key. 30 years of his life, every sleepless night, every failure survived, every brick lay by hand, gone. Between breakfast and dinner, he kept waiting to wake up from it. He never would. And when he finally drove home, broken and desperate for the one person who was supposed to be on his side, he found the betrayal ran deeper still. His wife was already packing her designer suitcases. She did not cry. She did not even look surprised. She told him, almost kindly, that she had married a chief executive, not a failure. She set the divorce papers on the counter, picked up her bags, and walked out without looking back. And as the door clicked shut, Ji-won finally understood the truth of his entire life. Every person in it had loved his success. Not one of them had ever loved him. But taking the company and the marriage was not enough for them. They needed to make sure he could never rise again. Manufactured scandals appeared in the press, anonymous sources, leaked half-truths, lawsuits filed not to win, but to bleed him of every last coin he had. Within months, his name was poisoned in every boardroom in the country. He fought. Of course he fought. He spent everything he had left on lawyers, chasing justice through a system that money had already bought. But Dae-soo had the company's billions and the best attorneys alive. One by one, every case Jae-won filed was dismissed, buried, or turned against him. The harder he fought, the deeper he sank. And so the great Han Ji-won fell. From a penthouse to a basement, from billions to debt collectors at the door, from the most envied man in the city to a cautionary tale people told at dinner parties. In a single year, the man who had everything had nothing at all. The years that followed were gray and slow and cruel. He drifted from one small job to the next, each more humiliating than the last. He drank to forget the boardroom. He drank to forget her face. He drank to forget the sound of his brother's laughter. None of it ever worked, not even for a single night. And from the gutter, he watched them soar. He watched his old company climb to heights he had only dreamed of. He watched Park Dae-soo's face on magazine covers, hailed as the lone genius who had built it all from nothing. And no one, anywhere, remembered the man who actually had. On a cold night 3 years after they destroyed him, Han Ji-won climbed to the roof of the building that still carried the company's name. The rain came down in sheets. He did not bother with an umbrella. A man has to have something left to protect before he bothers to stay dry. He thought of the boy who had studied under a streetlight, of the handshake in the rainy cafe, of everything he had built and everything they had torn from his hands, and as the rage and the regret of a wasted life pressed down on his ruined heart, it simply stopped. Han Ji-won collapsed in the rain, alone, and closed his eyes, certain it was for the last time. And then, there was light. Warm, golden, and a sound he had not heard in over a decade. The cheap plastic alarm clock from his very first rented room shrieking at him to get up. He woke with a strangled gasp, clutching at his chest, bracing for the pain that had killed him. But there was no pain. He looked down at his hands and they were smooth, young, unscarred. The broken, dying body of an old man had simply vanished into the morning air. He stumbled to the cracked bathroom mirror, and what stared back made his knees give out. It was his own face, 13 years younger, before the company, before the marriage, before Park Dae-soo had ever spoken his name, before any of it had begun. Hands shaking, he tore the newspaper out from under the door and read the date. Once, twice, a third time because his mind refused to accept it. It was impossible. He had gone back 13 years to the exact week before he would walk into that cafe and shake the hand of the man who would one day end his life. For a long while, he could only sit on the cold floor and shake. And then, slowly, something broke open in his chest. He began to laugh, and then to weep, and then to laugh again like a man unhinged. Not from grief, from something he had not felt in 13 long years. Hope. He had been given the one thing the universe never gives, a second chance. And as the tears dried on his young face, the hope hardened into something colder and far more dangerous. Because Han Ji-won remembered. He remembered every betrayal, every lie, every name, every face, every move they would make. He did not just have a second chance. He had the entire future written in his memory like a map. He stood at the small window of his first apartment and watched the sun rise over a city that did not yet know his name. and he made himself a promise. Last time, he had built an empire out of trust and love, and watched thieves carry it away. This time, he would build a weapon, and he would aim it at every single one of them. That first night, he did not sleep for a moment, he wrote. Every stock that would rise and the exact day it would happen, every company that would collapse, every merger, every scandal, every crisis for 13 years poured out of his memory and onto the page in a steady, ruthless hand. By dawn, the notebook was full. It was not a diary, it was a battle plan. A precise, dated, 13-year roadmap of the future, held in the hands of a man the world still believed was nobody. He looked at it and, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he smiled without any bitterness at all. He had no money yet, no company, no name, but he had something no human being had ever possessed. He knew exactly what was coming, and he knew exactly where to drive the very first blade. He gathered every coin he had in this young life, a few $1,000s scraped from nothing, and he walked into a small brokerage. The clerk barely looked up at the shabby young man with the tiny account. Ji-won put every cent of it into a single forgotten stock that the entire world had written off as dead. 3 weeks later, that dead stock multiplied more than 20 times over. The same clerk who had ignored him now stared at the screen, then at Ji-won, then back at the screen, unable to speak. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, Han Ji-won held capital that was truly, undeniably his own. He did not stop to celebrate. He took the winnings and struck again and again, every move surgical, every bet a certainty. A crash he knew was coming, a merger no analyst could predict. In 6 months, a few $1,000s had become millions. The market began to whisper about a ghost who never lost. The analysts went half mad trying to explain him. They built models, drew charts, invented theories. None of them came close to the truth because the truth was impossible. There was no algorithm, there was no inside man. There was only a dead man who had already watched the next 13 years play out once before. And now came the move he had waited 13 years to make. The investors, the same powerful men who, in his last life, had quietly funded Dae-soo's betrayal. This time, Ji-won reached them first. He won their trust first. He bound them to himself with deals too good to refuse years before his enemy even knew the war had begun. Then he went hunting for his people. He remembered every brilliant mind that Dae-soo would one day overlook, discard, or destroy. The programmer fired for telling an inconvenient truth, the engineer no one would fund. One by one, while they were still hungry and unknown, Ji-won found them and he made them his. He found the programmer first, in a basement apartment 3 days from giving up entirely. Ji-won sat across from him and described the man's own unbuilt invention back to him in perfect detail. The programmer went pale. "How could you possibly know that?" he whispered. Ji-won only smiled. "Come work for me," he said. "I'll make sure the world never gets to ignore you." And then there was Seo-yan, a brilliant young financial analyst who, in his last life, Dae-soo had fired for asking one too many honest questions, and whose warnings Ji-won had been too proud to hear. He remembered her integrity and how badly he had failed her. This time she would not be a casualty. This time she would stand at his right hand from the very first day. She studied him with sharp, suspicious eyes when he offered her the job. "Why me?" she asked. "I'm nobody. You'll see things others miss," he told her, "and you won't be afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. I need exactly one person like that. The rest I can buy." She took the job. It was the smartest decision either of them ever made. With money, with allies, and with perfect knowledge of everything to come, Han Ji-won began to build again. But this time it was faster, sharper, colder, and this time before he let any man close, he tested his loyalty until he was certain it would not break. Behind a locked door in his new office, he built something he never could have built in his first life, a map of the future. Every player in Dae-soo's coming conspiracy, every board member who would betray him, every secret, every weakness, every debt and vice and lie. He was not merely building a company, he was tying a noose, one careful knot at a time. And he watched. He watched the past replay itself like a film he had already seen. There was his old company, taking its first small steps. There was Park Dae-soo, young and ambitious and utterly unaware, climbing exactly as Ji-won remembered. The hunter, this time, was already in position. The prey did not even know the hunt had started. To Dae-soo, in this new world, Han Ji-won was not an enemy. He was not a partner. He was not anything at all yet. Only a name beginning to stir in the markets. A hand he had not yet shaken. A friendship he had not yet decided to forge and then to sell. He had no idea that his own ending had already woken up and was coming for him. Within 2 years, Ji-won's new company was the talk of the entire industry. Analysts could not understand how a firm so young moved so flawlessly, as if it could see around every corner before the corner arrived. They called him a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation visionary. None of them suspected they were watching a dead man take his revenge in real time. And this time, he did not build it on the backs of people he would later be betrayed by. He built it on people he had chosen, tested, and earned. They were loyal not because he charmed them, but because he saw them, protected them, and made them powerful. An army does not betray a general who would bleed for it. And then came the night he had been waiting 2 lifetimes for. A grand industry gala filling a marble hall with the most powerful people in the country. The same titans who, in his first life, had looked straight through him as though he were made of glass. Only this time, the entire room bent toward him. The mysterious young investor who never made a wrong move. The genius no one could explain. Executives who had once ignored him now competed for a single minute of his attention. He smiled and charmed and watched the great doors at the far end of the hall, because he knew exactly who was about to walk through them. And then it happened. Across that crowded golden room, for the first time in his new life, Han Ji-won's eyes found the man who had murdered everything he loved. Park Dae-soo, young, hungry, charming a circle of admirers, smiling at a future he believed was his for the taking. Drawn like every ambitious man toward the center of power, Dae-soo crossed the room to introduce himself. He extended his hand, all warmth and easy charm, and said it was an honor. He said he had heard truly remarkable things. He had absolutely no idea that he was reaching out to shake hands with his own ruin. And Han Ji-won looked down at that hand. The same hand that, in another life, had slid the papers across the table. The same hand that had patted his shoulder while planning his funeral. And he took it. He shook it, warm and firm, and he smiled. "Hello," he said softly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. You have no idea how long." For one heartbeat, something flickered behind Dae-soo's eyes. A chill he couldn't name. A strange certainty that he had met this man somewhere before, somewhere terrible. Then it passed, and he laughed, and the moment was gone. He would not understand that feeling for years. By the time he did, it would already be far too late. They had taken his company, his wife, his name, his life. They had thrown him away like garbage and slept soundly, certain he was gone forever. They had no idea that the dead man had come back, that he held their every secret in his hand, and that he had already begun, very quietly, to take it all apart. This time, Han Ji-won would not build an empire for thieves to steal. This time, he would take theirs, board seat by board seat, secret by secret.